there's an example, a question surrounding two things. One is when it comes to Old Testament textual criticism, one is who killed Goliath?
Mhm.
And the second one was how tall is Goliath? So could you walk us through these two textual variants? Let us know what it is and how we resolve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for viewers that want to do a deeper dive, we have a video. I have two videos on my channel. One is in our superhero seminary series. So that's why I'm surrounded by toys. I use these 80s action
Nice.
figures. They're not idols. They're not deities. People leave those comments all the time on
Oh,
my page.
sure.
Roll my eyes. Um, I'm not burning incense to Superman. But we have a series called Superhero Seminary where I use these action figures to kind of satirically tongue in cheek teach biblical studies. And the one Professor Ant-Man here right behind me has
Yep.
one called How Tall Was Goliath? And we look at this Old Testament text critical issue. And then we have another video where I, no superhero seminary involved, I teach on the passage is who killed Goliath? Was it
Right.
David or was it Elhanan? Because if you read, we can do that one first because it's a little more
Yeah.
in depth. Yeah, so just I'll just run through this, and then if anybody wants to go deeper, check out the video where we spend more time. If you read 2 Samuel 21:19, like let's take the New American Standard, there was war with the Philistines again at Gob, and Elhanan, son of Yaare Ogarim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And this is what, NRSV, RSV, ESV, the old NIV, others, they just take this. So if you compare that, let's take the New American Standard and compare the NIV, the newer, the 2011.
Hmm.
It says, in another battle with Philistines at Gob, Elhanan, son of Yair the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath, the Gittite. So
Okay.
this one has him
Okay.
killing Goliath, and the new NIV has him killing the brother of Goliath. In the King James, the King James translators had noted this, and they had put this little. So they translated Elhanan, the son of Yair Ogargim, the Bethlehemite slew, and then there's the King James asterisk, the brother of
Oh,
Goliath. So, of course, King James readers know when there's an asterisk, that means see the margin. And they put a little marginal note here. It says, see First Chronicles 20, verse 5.
oh, that's
When
interesting.
you,
So this is sorry to interrupt. So
no,
this
go
isn't
ahead.
really the brother of is not really a translation. It's
Yeah.
more of a note added into the text because of First Chronicles 20.
Yes. The King James translators, which is why it's in italics, the King James translators added words, God forbid,
Hmm. Yeah.
they added words that they thought brought out the sense of what the passage is saying. Now, they were doing some
Right.
text criticism because the brother of is not in the Hebrew text anywhere.
Right.
But in First Chronicles 20, parallel account, it reads Elhanan, the son of Yair, slew Lachmi, the brother of Goliath.
Right.
And they have a
Interesting.
note there that says he's also called Yair or Agim in
Hmm.
Second Samuel. So basically, and we do this in the video, if people want to take a deeper dive, again, see our Disciple Dojo video. But there are multiple terms in Hebrew that the translators are having to reckon with. There's this word, orgim, and it
Hmm.
just means weavers. It's just the
Right.
plural for weavers. And then there's Beth Halachmi, and then there's Et Goliath. Those are the words that are having that appear in both of these verses.
Right.
So for Samuel, you have, and I've color coded them so people that don't read Hebrew can at least see. There
Right.
was war of the Philistines again at Gob, and Elhanan, son of Yair, and there it is, Ben Yair, son of Orgim, and there it is, Orgim, the Bethlehemite, and there it is, Beth Halachmi. Well,
Hmm.
in First Chronicles, it's translated as Ben Yaur, so son of Yair or Yaur, and that's where you have a Qetev and you have the Kere. Eth Lachmi. So you don't have Beth Halachmi, you have Eth
Hmm.
Lachmi.
Interesting.
And so that's, you get some of these, and then instead of Eth Goliath, and Eth is the direct object marker in Hebrew, the
Yeah.
direct object marker is just Eth. you have Achi Goliath, brother of
Okay.
Goliath. So basically, and the Targum, when you look at the Targum, which is the Aramaic paraphrase, loose translation of the Old
Mhm.
Testament, um, they go out of their way to say it's David, son of Jesse. So it's not some
Right.
other David or Elhanan. Um, and then again, let's just get right to it.
Yeah.
It comes down to manuscript. In 1 Samuel 21:19, you have, and here's from, I think this is from
Oh, wow.
the Aleppo Codex. You have Eth Goliath, Goliath. And in this sorry. And in Second Chronicles, you have Achi Goliath. The only difference between those two
Yeah.
is
Ziyud.
this letter, the Tau, which already looks like Chet. And then if you just note that a yod could be added easily, could be picked up as whether it's a blemish on the parchment, whether it's a fleck of ink, whether it's something, eth Aki can easily get confused with eth.
That's interesting. That reminds me of the discussion surrounding the variant of God who versus he who in First Timothy 3:16, because
Mm-hmm.
the difference is just the potential fading depending on which position you're coming from of
Yeah.
two lines, right? That's
Yeah, they
super
were
interesting.
remarkably similar in ancient handwritten manuscripts. And then, so that's part one of what's going on in this verse to give the discrepancy. And then part two is if you if you have Beth Lachami versus Eth Lachmi. And so one, if it's this, then it's the Bethlehemite. If it's this, then it's Lachmi and the definite direct object marker.
Right.
So in this case, the Samuel text is there transcription errors in the Samuel text. That the Chronicles text preserves the correct reading. And not only, and it's not a case of, well, you just ignore Samuel. You can look at the first Samuel text and you can look at how it's handling and you can explain how those manuscripts arose.
Right.
I mean, these are well known in New Testament. They're more popular. They're more common because there's more of them. But things like homeotelion, things like
Right.
parablepsis, your eye skips a line. So what you have going on, letter confusion, letter metathesis, you can explain the Samuel reading very easily from the Chronicles reading
Right.
using text critical concepts.
Okay.
So
Now
in the
is
end, Second Chronicles preserves the correct reading, and First
right.
Samuel preserves some of the text critical issues, mistakes in the manuscripts.
Right.
And that's where, and that's what the King James translators were noting, and that's why they saw adding those words
Hmm.
with the asterisks and the italics wasn't a big deal
Well, that's
because they
super
were like,
interesting.
oh, this is how we got there. Um, so yeah, I mean, again, if you want to know more on that particular one, you can check out the video that we go into. But it's fascinating, and it shows that I think you can say there we can look at a clear error in the manuscript, and that error in the manuscript does not take away from our ability to get back to the original text, which is what text criticism is all about anyway.
Right. That's
So
awesome. That's super interesting. So is there like a Kere or Qetev reading there in
in
First Samuel?
Qetev comes into play in First Chronicles. First Samuel doesn't have it. They do have
Okay.
it in First Chronicles where it comes to Yair versus Yair,
Okay, I
and
see.
they're saying it's Yair. That's the name of the person. Elhanan was the son of Yair, and he
Gotcha.
killed Lachmi, the brother of Goliath.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. So that's a walkthrough there.
Mm-hmm.
Now there was one more kind of popular one, and this was how tall was Goliath?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Goliath's height one, and I don't have slides on hand for this one, which is, but you can just look at the text.
Yeah.
Um, let me just pull up my quote so I'll make sure. Yeah. So in 1 Samuel 17:4, it says, let me just pick an English translation. I'll just go with NIV. It says, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the NIV translates it. Old NIV. The updated NIV, the one that's out now, NIV 2011, it says a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. So NIV has updated and they've dropped the over 9 feet tall and they've just put 6 cubits in a span. And there's a footnote that they've added to it. And the footnote says that is about 9 foot 9 inches or 3 meters.
Right.
This is one of the places where the NIV, when they updated, actually you could submit suggestions. Went back when the NIV was in the process of being updated before 2011. And I submitted this and they didn't note it. And it frustrates me about the NIV 2011. They had such a golden opportunity because other translations like New Revised, I'm trying to see, even the ESV, I want to say the ESV noted it, but I don't have a print edition in front of me.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, the ESV does note it. The ESV has a footnote after 6 cubits in a span. And the ESV footnote after 6 says Hebrew.
Okay.
Semicolon. Septuagint, Dead Sea Scroll, and Josephus have 4 cubits in a span.
Okay.
And so what the ESV, and the ESV is not known for its theological liberalism.
Right.
What the ESV is noting correctly in this case, I pick on the ESV a lot for other reasons, but this is a case where the ESV got it right. They did what the NIV should have done, which is they say to the reader, hey, the Hebrew text does say 6 cubits in a span, but the Dead Sea Scrolls have always said 4 cubits in a span.
Right.
The Septuagint has always said 4 cubits in a span. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, which once they were found and translated and made available, lo and behold, Hebrew of the Dead Sea Scrolls says 4 cubits in a span.
Oh, interesting.
So you have a text that's up to 1,000 years later is where you get 6 cubits in a span. But the much earlier text, both in the Greek Septuagint and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and to me that's the smoking gun, is you have just writing in Greek, you have the Septuagint writing in Greek, and they've always said 4 cubits in a span. And some say, well, you can dismiss that because they're a translation.
Sure.
Dead Sea Scrolls aren't a translation. They're in Hebrew, and they say 4 cubits in a span.
Right.
So this is a case where in our superhero seminar video, Dr. Ant-Man presents these and lays it out and says, listen, Goliath was a giant, because the average height of a Hebrew male at that time was probably somewhere around 5'3". And 4 cubits in a span is about 6'6" to 6'9". So if you want to put someone like a modern, whoever, think of a guy, think of like Tom Cruise. I mean, he's pretty short. I think he's like 5'6" or something.
Right.
Think of a guy even shorter than that. Put him next to, and I use the example of like Danny DeVito. Put Danny DeVito, who's, around 5 feet, give or take, maybe shorter. Put him next to LeBron James. One is legitimately a giant. And there's no human way that someone 5'3" could be expected to face in one-on-one combat someone who's 6'7", 6'8". But you end up not having to defend the idea of Goliath being over 9 feet tall when we don't have evidence of, the evidence that people put forward of giants in the ancient world is always either hearsay or it might be some random skeleton. But everything we know about physics and bone structure and human dexterity tells us once you can't get much over 7 feet, 7'3" before you start to decline in mobility and muscle density. So, and we use, put somebody who's in the NBA, look at a 7-footer. Most centers are gangly. They're awkward, especially if they're over 7'2", 7'3".
Yep.
So you can have somebody like Shaquille O'Neal, who's still pretty athletic, or a David Robinson, they're over 7 feet tall. They're still athletic. But when you start getting into 7'6", 7'7", guys like Yao Ming, guys like Sean
Yeah.
Bradley,
Hmm.
those you're no longer in formidable warrior status, and certainly not somebody who's strong enough to pick up the armor and use the armor that the Bible describes Goliath
Right.
as wearing.
Right.
So, long and short of it, Goliath was probably around 7 feet tall, not over 9 feet tall.
Right.
And that's still a giant.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. I've never heard this before. So like I said, spend most of my time in New Testament textual criticism, but that's a really interesting thing here. Now, to get all Michael Heiser on you, would you consider would Goliath been considered a Nephilim?
Yeah, I very much appreciate the work of Michael Heiser. I've read Michael Heiser's work, and I think he
Yeah.
makes some great observations. I do not think the Nephilim were giants. I do not think. I mean, I think they were mighty men. They were
Yeah.
large.
Yeah.
I don't think they were supernatural giants. I
Okay.
should probably say that better. I think they were mighty, formidable, fierce warlords. I think Gilgamesh probably would have been in the category of the Nephilim.
Right.
But I don't think they were literally over 9 feet tall.
Right.
And I don't think there's any biblical reason that requires them to be. So yeah, Nephilim as a description of giant, again,
Yeah.
giant is a relative term. And people
Right.
in biblical times were not average height 5'9", which is what modern North American average height is. So when you factor that in, giants in the ancient world would easily somebody over 7 feet, over 6 feet 5 would absolutely qualify as a giant. Somebody like Saul would have stood out because they were probably closer to a normal average height of somebody today. That would have stood out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think you have to imagine. Certainly, I mean, yeah, 6 foot, 6'6", 6'7", 6'9", 7'2", 7'3". That is perfectly capable of being called a giant. But the text just tells us Goliath wasn't 6 cubits in a span. He was 4 cubits in a span.
All right.
So that what we do with that is up to us, but that is where the text critical
evidence.
Yeah. And so that's where I have to land as what Scripture teaches.
Very cool. Well, Mr. JM, thank you so much for coming on the channel. Was there anything else that you wanted to say before we part ways here?
I think when it comes to issues of text criticism, I think especially is when you have to hold things with loose hands. I say that on Disciple Dojo all the time. Hold it with loose hands. Whether it's New Testament text criticism or Old Testament text criticism, you're still dealing with probabilities and what is more likely versus what is ironclad. And people just want that certainty and that definiteness. And once you step into Old Testament, it's both an art and a science. And so you have to hold things looser than some Christians are comfortable with. And I don't have a problem with it, but I know some people do. So that's when they would need to really look at what is text criticism and have it presented by people who are solid, spirit-filled, Bible-believing, committed to the authority of Scripture and even the inerrancy of Scripture. None of this goes against the Chicago Statement on inerrancy, for instance. So I would just help if any viewers are getting nervous, which viewers on my channel start getting nervous.
Oh, sure.
They don't need to. They don't need to be, because there's no. I fully support the authority and the inspiration of Scripture, and I don't think you need.
There's a really interesting analogy here, and since you're a martial arts guy, when I was doing karate, one thing that we needed to learn was not to not be so firm, right, in the things that you're doing, but there's a looseness involved in your katas and all that, and if you can train that looseness becomes a kind of firmness. It's really hard to explain, but you're a karate guy or a martial arts guy, so you understand exactly what I'm talking about. And once you get that, right, that everything opens up. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But anyway, so thank you so much for your time, JM. It's been a pleasure to have you on the channel. Maybe sometime in the future, if something comes up with Old Testament textual criticism, maybe I'll give you a ring if you're good with that.
Sure. Feel free. Right. I'm no expert, but it's the landscape within which I spend more time. So I'm happy to chat anytime.
Very good. All right, brothers and sisters. I hope you found this discussion edifying and useful to you. And until next time, we'll see you around.